Hey there, everyone. You're listening to No Bed of Roses. Welcome back, everyone. Today's guest is Francis Battista, co-founder and current chairman of Best Friends Animal Society, a wonderful organization. If you don't know about it, you are in for a treat. If you do know about it, you're still in for a treat. Obviously, lots of challenges with what's been going on for so many people and their animal friends through the pandemic. And Francis touches on how Best Friends stayed agile through it all, and also talks some about the origin story, which is fascinating. So without any further delay, here's Francis. This has been obviously, for you, for everyone else, for the animals, a pretty challenging year, I would assume.
Well, it has been, but it's also been a really interesting and exciting year because it's required a lot of innovation and a lot of, I think the term of art that became sort of almost a cliche was pivoting. Everybody was pivoting because of the changes in the way we do work and the way we do our business and the way we have to, the goals don't change, the life-saving needs don't change, but the entire playing field changed. That required an adaptation on the fly. It really was a matter of building the airplane while you're flying it. So it was pretty cool.
That's something, building the airplane while you're flying it is something that I think you're really used to, Francis, knowing you for as long as I do.
Well, yes, we've always had that. I don't know how to take that. A lot of the airplanes we were flying together were sort of never quite finally put together. We did manage to bring them in for landings, but sometimes with a gear up or something like that. My role is a lot different than it has been over the years. So, I'm not in operations with Best Friends Animal Society as I was. I'm chairman of the board, and I do a lot of internal consulting and working with a team in an advisory capacity, mostly from the point of view of, we've been there, done that, or the last time we were here, we turned left rather than right, and here's the reason we turned left rather than right. But what happened this year was it was really on our leadership team, mainly Julie Castle, our CEO, and her crew to just make these really, really dramatic adjustments. And so for you, I'm sure you're familiar with a lot of the things that are going on, but for folks who aren't, it was really a matter of the normal routine of animal welfare and our particular quadrant of it, which was ending, our mission is to end shelter killing, to end the killing of healthy and treatable pets in shelters.
Save them all.
Save them all. The protocols for that have been, fairly well laid down. It's not rocket science. You're just really working to build safety nets, to create more adoptions, build more fostering, provide more resources into the community. Most of it was all centered around brick and mortar operations, because that's where the animals were. A lot of it was involved in driving traffic to the shelters. We have this term, noses in, noses out, preventing the noses from going into the shelter and increasing the number of noses coming out of the shelter. All of that changed when COVID hit. A lot of the shelters had to close. And, one of the things the team first did was to make sure to petition and advocate that animal shelters and animal shelter workers were essential workers, that this was something that needed to happen because of the need there.
I can't say I've heard noses in, noses out. Is that a t-shirt yet? Because if it ain't, it ought to be. It ought to be. How were you received with that petition to get shelter workers categorized as essential? How did that go?
It went well. It went very well, and it went well from the perspective that this is a vital function of a community to care for pets, but also that didn't change the fact that it restricted the public. You have animals in shelters, they have to be fed, they have to be cared for. The limitations and restrictions that came in were how much public access you could have. So a lot of the shelters really were closed to the public. So how do you go about doing pet adoptions if people can't come in and meet the animals? How do you do, all of the different things that, if you can imagine what a city shelter or community animal services operation looks like, it's all very people-oriented, people-focused. You have people coming into the shelter, you have people adopting, you have people surrendering animals, you have all sorts of things going on that involve person-to-person contact. And then, of course, you have the whole veterinary side of things, with people having to take animals to the vet that they could no longer do. So there was, televeterinary medicine became a thing. But what really happened is something that should have been happening all along. And, one of the things we've known for a very long time, and this is wisdom from one of our movement mentors, a guy by the name of Rich Avanzino, who was the head of San Francisco SPCA and then became the head of Maddie's Fund, had this saying, look, the more animals are in shelters, the more animals die. So the idea is keep animals out of the shelter. The public is not the problem. The public is the solution. The public is the answer. We need to trust the public to be the solution to this issue, as opposed to the attitudes that had built up over the years about, it's the public that's the problem. The shelter isn't the problem. The public is the problem.
So Rich's thinking was radical at the time, Francis?
Rich's thinking was radical and has been radical up until the tragedy of COVID created the circumstances that proved him right. What happened is that in order to actually function, we had to recruit more of the public to be foster homes. We had to recruit more of the public to be part of the safety net for animals, to undertake neighbor-to-neighbor adoptions, to provide for their own neighbors, people who were particularly vulnerable, to do pet walking, to have pet food banks, so all of these things that are normally associated with brick and mortar operations, not all of them, but a big chunk of them were pushed out into the community.
Almost crowdsourced.
Well, crowdsourced exactly. And also the idea that, the community, the best safety net for the animals is a pet loving community. And so how do you mobilize that? And as always, the public was, way ahead. And so there was an immediate response and willingness to step into this role. So multiplied by the fact, and I'm sure you've seen a lot of this, that a lot of people were stuck at home and adopted pets as companions.
We're one of those. We have Malibu, our 10-month-old COVID pup.
The thing is, well, what happens when COVID's over? Well, don't worry. Put a pet with a family and the pet will do the rest. That relationship and that bond is very powerful. This idea, and it's an idea that Best Friends has been pushing for a very long time as well, the idea that really where we want to see sheltering go to is that the shelter, rather than being the kind of place that we've come to expect it to be, where animals are housed and in stressful environments and a lot of them are put down and, all of that kind of thing. The shelter, it should be a community resource center where the administration of the work is really to help the community better care for their pets and to push more of the animals that would otherwise be in the shelter out to the community as fosters and adoptions and the like. So what we saw over the past year was actually a dramatic reduction in shelter killing as a result of this. And is again, simply the simple fact is what Rich back in, however many years ago, well over 30 years ago, said, the more animals in shelters, the more animals die. We need to keep animals out of the shelters. We need to keep animals in the community and have the community be the resource for them.
3 decades later, it takes a global pandemic, but it proves up.
It does. And also something that's facilitated that is, of course, all the tech that's now available. Apps, people are able to connect with each other very easily. They're able to find support. They're able to find other adopters. They're able to use these televet applications to be able to get with the veterinarian via an app. Technology has been a tremendous asset in all of this as well. On top of the tremendous need that was created by the demands of the pandemic, there was this infusion of technology and an uptake of technological tools to be able to facilitate this. The whole thing has been at once incredibly challenging because we have, for the organization, we have staff who are now, their job description has changed dramatically. And for a lot of people who are located in cities, so we have operations in Los Angeles, operations in Salt Lake, operations in New York and Atlanta. And in places like New York, they were on lockdown for a big chunk of that time. So they couldn't even go into their facility. The facility itself that we have in Soho, a beautiful setup there, was closed. How do you do that work that you were doing out of a cool walk up and high traffic area to now in a method that meets and matches the needs without having that facility and without having people on the ground handling the animals? And so all of those things had to be worked out, and each one of them in each community is different. For example, up in Salt Lake, they had goals. Every year we always have a goal. We're going to adopt out more animals this year than last year. But right now, because they didn't have that same dynamic, they keyed their metrics and their goals not to what they did in the past, but to what the shelter and what the community needed. So they were doing drive-up adoptions, video meet and greets, and a lot more video vignettes of the animals. In Los Angeles, where there's a huge kitten problem, there's also an injunction that prevents TNR, which is a trap, neuter, return, which is a management tool for community cats. That's been prohibited by an injunction that was filed years ago, but it's now changing. But in any event, the limitations on that mean that there are thousands upon thousands of kittens that enter the shelter. And most of them are, under 8 weeks old. And if they were to just simply go into the shelter, they don't have the resources to bottle feed them and take care of them. So most of those animals were being killed. So, for example, when we started the No Kill Los Angeles Coalition, NKLA, there were 23,000 animals. That was our baseline the year prior, that were being killed in Los Angeles.
A majority, animals, what proportion? Kittens, cats, dogs, puppies?
7,000 of those were kittens under 8 weeks old. Animals that were, if you just can see them along for 2 or 3 weeks, they become the cutest, most adoptable, adorable animals in the shelter. They fly off the shelves, but they were being killed because the shelters didn't have the resources to care for them in-house. They're very vulnerable to disease and susceptible to any of the things that are flying around the shelter. And they didn't have the foster networks to move them through. So first year we did this, or over the past few years when we were building this, we had this huge kitten nursery operation in-house, where it was like the entire operation was turning over kittens. And then we had foster families coming in, 24/7 operation with people bottle feeding neonatal kittens down the corridors in this room, that room, and everywhere. The whole place was just jam-packed with kittens. This year, that was all pushed out to volunteers and to homes with support from the team. Rather than having animals go into even our operation, they just went straight into foster care. And then in doing adoptions, they would do what we call drive-by adoptions. It was all kind of organized and, it was all set up with whatever tech methodology they needed to do. All of these things are transformative, and they will have legs because they have changed the way work is being done. They've saved many, many more lives.
Any negatives out of it, Francis?
The negatives out of this situation generally is going to be the tail end of this. What happens if 30 or 40 million people are evicted with their pets? So low cost, affordable pet inclusive housing is a big problem and a big issue that's may or may not. Hopefully it will be cut off by appropriate actions by Congress, but who knows? That's a concern that's looming. The other thing has been also, we have 800 staff around the country. As I was saying, their job profile has changed. And for a lot of people, that meant changed dramatically from being a kennel worker, an animal caregiver, a direct hands-on person in one of our regional centers, relating to the public, an adoption coordinator, greeting people at the door. So all of that and those roles have changed. And so there's a big emphasis on how do we make all of this work for our staff without lowering performance expectations for the animals, and also how do we provide security future for staff whose jobs are in complete flux? So that has been a major challenge. And the teams, particularly, as I said, Julie Castle, our CEO, just handled this amazingly well. So we didn't go through any layoffs. Her and her team figured out how to reorganize our work and our operations to sustain our team, readjust work descriptions and job descriptions. And if people say, well, look, this isn't what I kind of signed up for. I really wanted to be doing this kind of work. I appreciate the opportunity. By the end of the year, October, and running through December, people who were unhappy or didn't feel they were really qualified or didn't fit their anticipated role with animals, they were given a voluntary separation package if they wanted it. It was incredibly generous and provided, extended insurance and various other things and a separation package based on however many years they've been working. So it was all incredibly positive. No loss of confidence with the team. There was, in fact, an incredible boost of confidence and esprit throughout the organization because of the way it was handled and because of the support and commitment that was made to all of the staff and to the animals. But there's obviously challenges, incredibly stressful, but they handled it very, very well. We're still at the tail end of it, but we've kind of made it through that big hump, and we are looking forward to the next year. We don't know how it's going to be. Hopefully it will be better.
It's inspiring on so many levels because it all unraveled so quickly, and then into the spring in March when it really hit for so many across the country, but that they were able to be so dynamic, so proactive, and 800 staff, the care that I know is emblematic of Best Friends was widespread, not just for the animals, but of course for the people.
Even though the facilities and the operations they were working in changed dramatically, and in some cases were shut down for the entire time. And just the whole thing has so dramatically changed. The customer base, the animals, has not changed. The work had to be reconfigured. That had so many moments of excitement and celebration and collective congratulations to people that it really continued to maintain this esprit. When we had people who were potentially sitting on their hands from whatever level, we said, okay, well, look, let's call our membership, check in on them, make sure they're okay. We're not going to ask them for money. We're not going to, it's not a donation request. This is really simply to call in.
How you doing?
How you doing?
How you doing?
And is everything okay with you and your pets? Is there anything you need? Is there anything we can, any resource we can direct you to or help you with? That in itself was transformative for our team and also for our members who's holy mackerel. This really is astonishing. So there was really thinking out of the box. And again, extending the whole ethic of the organization to walk the walk. Some person in England developed this concept of kindness cards where they would, say, do you need any help? Well, we developed those for our action teams, and they went around putting them in mailboxes in their communities, letting them know that if they need help with their pets, if they need pet food, if they need a dog walked, if they need an animal taken to the vet and they're unable to because of if they're in a vulnerable population and are concerned about getting out of the house, how can we help? And these weren't just that it was Best Friends staff. This is kind of an army of volunteers who are out there putting these things out to people and building that community base. So it really was a remarkable and incredibly creative way of doing all of these things. And every day was an idea that had percolated up, was bearing fruit, was being celebrated, and was beginning to move the needle in a new way. And so this kind of really dark cloud that had descended and this sense of gloom and doom and that was just the pall that was over everything began to lift pretty early on by virtue of the fact of these really creative ideas and an understanding that on the part of the staff that don't worry, your job is not in jeopardy. You're going to be okay. So don't worry about that. Let's get on and figure out how do we do the work and do it in different ways.
Again, it's just so inspiring. And I'm thinking because I'm talking to Francis Battista that I'm thinking Italian Renaissance painters and chiaroscuro. You must have the dark to see the light. And I'm not on anything. I'm just sipping herbal tea, and I got there on all on my own, Francis, just to get there. So, what do you think out of this great story? And I have this idiotic grin on my face listening to you because it is inspiring. It's in my DNA to love all things Best Friends. Not that I'm biased, but I am. What do you think is going to stick now, Francis, if anything? And of course, it's going to evolve. We know that. So, but what do you think will stick?
One more thing about the past year,
sure,
and it would be really ridiculous to not include it because it's been such an important piece, is the social justice issues. Black Lives Matter, and the fact that, as you know, and as we've seen, at the first No More Homeless Pets conference that we did in Virginia Beach, Virginia in 2001, one of the speakers got up and said, okay, anybody here who's not white, please raise your hand. And, 2 hands went up. and that forever animal welfare has been a largely white middle class activity. The idea that people of color don't love pets, are not interested in this, are not committed to it, has just been such a blind spot. It speaks to the elements of institutional racism that you're pretty much blind to unless you actually are obligated to confront it. If you were to look at the kind of the population of animal welfare, deduce from the profile and racial composition of the participants, well, these are the people who care about animals. That's changed dramatically in recent years, but still, most low-income communities, black and white and brown, are resource deserts, particularly in inner cities. You know, if you live in South LA and you need to go to a veterinarian, it's hard to get to a veterinarian. They're just not in your community.
That's right.
So that these economic, almost default redlining of services provided to communities is known very well with regard to all sorts of different services and businesses, applies equally to those that support pet keeping and animal welfare. That is something that has always been, again, another thing that has been, we need to do this. We need to relate to this. This is, here, if we're going to make Los Angeles or any city a no-kill community, we need to relate to the entire community. Again, something that became more and more functional in places like Los Angeles because of that we're on the ground, we're doing the work, and we're sort of investing in things. But in a lot of communities, that is just again, these resource deserts.
Francis, can I ask you, Francis, because I'm thinking back to all our experience together was from 93 in Los Angeles, a very diverse city, and many of the faces that I saw from the volunteers and the people that were just involved in general were fairly diverse. But was this an aha for you, for somebody who's really been in the trenches with this thing, or do you think just kind of this was an?
It wasn't so much an aha. It was I have, and we have promoted the idea of, look, we're doing a disservice to these communities because if you take look at Los Angeles and historical Los Angeles in terms of animal welfare and animal rescue. And it's particularly more with the private sector than the public sector, because in the city government and municipalities and municipal sheltering, it's obviously there's a lot of diversity and a lot of people of color working in the shelters and in civil service of one sort or another. But if you look at the profile of what a typical animal rescue operation in Los Angeles looked like, and forever what it looked like was likely women between the ages of 25 and 50 going into shelters in black and brown communities in South LA, in East LA, removing animals from the shelter and finding them homes over on the west side.
The west side, right.
So that was the model. And it left nothing behind, and it didn't address any issues. It didn't address any problems. It didn't identify animal lovers and give them the resources and capabilities to address those issues in their own community. It didn't address some of the bottom line things that drive the homeless pet problem. So, for example, it was not at all uncommon for people to look at an adoption application and make a judgment on a name, make a judgment on color of skin, or as opposed to and try and make a snap assessment on the potential quality of life that was going to be in store for the animal that they wanted to adopt based on these very prejudicial assessments.
There was profiling happening.
It's profiling.
Mm-hmm.
When you think about it, the logic of that is really screwy. So when we opened up our Mission Hills operation in Los Angeles, that we took on operation of one of the city shelters that was in the North Valley and adjacent to Sylmar and Mission Hills and Pacoima and those communities.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember.
What the result of that was, especially when you drop the barriers to adoption and say the only qualification for placing a pet really is do you love your pets?
Love this animal.
Yeah. And so, but then if you think through that, Well, now rather than someone in that community having to go being denied an adoption from someone who can provide a pet that's already spayed or neutered, already has its shots, has a health record, they have a relationship then with someone who can provide backup for them in training or care. They have a relationship with someone who can hook them up with veterinary services, rather than someone who's I can't adopt a dog from these guys, so let me go down to the local breeder, the guy down the street, and who's going to be my where am I going to get my shots? Well, the guy who does dog fighting, I can get my shots from him.
Right.
So what the effect of that profiling was to box in these folks, animal lovers, and deny them the relationship that they might otherwise have, and then also compound the problem, because now, rather than having an animal that's already fixed, they have to overcome the hurdle of to be able to spay or neuter. Rather than having to get an animal that already has its shots, a health record, they are left in mystery, and they may or may not be able to get their shots. So then all of that then just kind of multiplied and exacerbated the problem in these communities. And so you have what you have is a self-reinforcing
and self-perpetuating cycle.
It's really an imposed cycle that says, well, there you go. See, they don't care for their animal.
Mm-hmm.
Look, they're all sick. None of them are fixed. And it's was so stupid and short-sighted. And when you work backwards from the actual result, so now what's happening is you have engagement of people who are animal lovers. You empower people who are able to do more in their community. Animals that are fixed and healthy are going into the community. And also the people in that community have a place to go for resources and training or whatever they might need. And then they're also, by being located in that community and hiring in that community, you have people who look like the community. So the whole thing, it was really kind of an interesting take on all the things that are being discussed now. But it's something that really needs to happen much more.
And so what is that? So I was going to say, so you had, in a sense, this beta test with Mission Hills. You've got all this data. This has also proven itself, as you just described. Now we have this huge movement and finally conversations that are long overdue. How does Best Friends make sure that it is part of these conversations?
Well, we've engaged folks that are working with us to expand outreach in those communities, but also a lot of it is to do with our own, you can look across you don't have to have formal barriers to employment, but you look at your employment pool and you say, well, how many African Americans do we have? How many Hispanics do we have? How many, whatever what you name the category. You think, well, anybody can apply for a job. Well, yes, they can. But we understand that we really need to be much more proactive in recruiting and in making those jobs available and in pushing those jobs to those communities, because we need those folks in our work, not just to be politically correct or to fit a profile of an employment roster, but to achieve our mission. To achieve our mission, we have to be able to reach animal lovers in every community. And we're not going to reach animal lovers in every community unless we have staff and volunteers and representatives from every community.
And that are reflective. So like so many other organizations now, Francis, you guys are holding up, Best Friends is holding up the mirror and saying, let's look at ourselves. What does our roster look like? What is the diversity represented in this roster? And
exactly.
if I'm a person of color and I walk in, now we're saying this going forward, the brick and mortars may look a bit different, whatever. But still, if we just use that as an example, I walk in and I see someone who looks like me, who is running that facility, involved in that facility, engaged in that facility, right away, there's connective tissue right there.
Exactly. And to the credit of to the team and to Julie, this was in motion prior to the outbreak of the social justice movement in America with the killing of George Floyd. This was in motion prior to that, but it really became an organization-wide discussion, intentionally designed to bring out these concerns of our minority staff, and also how do we be more proactive, and how do we, forget the white guilt and all of the nonsense that you kind of almost have to go through a mandatory band of irrelevant nonsense, and get down to the fact of what do we do? How do we do it? Who are we listening to? What voices are we hearing? How do we get more voices at the table? That was another component of the year that kind of was in the middle of all of this. So again, lots of airplanes being built in flight.
Yep.
When you ask me about the future, that's part of the future. So part of the future is really decentralizing this work and making it much more community-based. When you examine the kind of the profiles of the communities that are in greatest need across the country, and you overlay that with maps of race and ethnicity, you have a direct correlation between the communities in greatest need, income, and race and various other things. It was not surprising.
Do you anticipate having more of a presence in more diverse neighborhoods and a physical presence, Francis?
Well, yes, and I think that's what kind of is in motion now. And, you know, in 2016, put a stake in the ground to lead the country to become no-kill, every shelter, every city, every state by 2025. The first step on that was, okay, well, that's nice, but what's the actual nature of this thing we've just undertaken? What's this? How big is this bite we took off?
How do we get there?
How do we get there, and what's the nature of the problem?
Right.
And we found out that we didn't even know, there were no real hard data about actually how many shelters there were in the country, let alone how many animals were being killed, where, and what kind. We started out by literally calling every single county in the country with staff and volunteers to get information, and then built, and you can see this at bestfriends.org/2025. And you'll see an interactive map, a data mapping thing there that gives the statistics of shelter admission, shelter deaths, what's going on in absolutely every shelter in the country. You just through cursors and drilling down. That took about 2 years to kind of really build out. But it's, again, a remarkable tool. What that threw up and what that identified were, wow, here's some places. I didn't even know this was a place. I didn't know that this was this little place in South Texas on the Rio Grande border was one of the worst shelters in the country. In that community, which is a largely Mexican-American area, where we've been doing these embed programs. We have staff, Best Friends staff go in and work in the shelters alongside of the local staff. We had one of our team go in as a shelter director. That place was turned around completely because it was really almost more a matter of giving people permission to save lives as opposed to being stuck in these kind of old routines and limitations that have been imposed by years of failure and reduced expectations. So now you have these communities in Edinburgh and Harlingen and places like that are shining. Santa Rosa, Florida, another place. We have somebody in Abilene, these areas of Texas. So what we found out that were the 5 states accounted for 50% of the killing of shelter pets. I'm looking
at the graphic now. California, Texas, North Carolina, Florida, Louisiana.
Yeah. And Texas was the worst. California is the second worst. Now, California is the worst. Texas is the second worst. So then this is back to the thing. What's the problem? Well, the problem in California is mostly cats. And it's largely in Southern California and inland and Central Valley. Programs that you use and the targeting that you use in terms of how you design your work is very different from community to community. So what that data gave us was information about, okay, what is the problem? And how do we harness and best utilize our resources to affect and impact this issue? Still answering your question about getting into communities of color.
Yeah.
It all really depends on what's the nature of the problem. And in a lot of these communities, it is cats. Building out these community cat programs are really pretty straightforward. They require permission and buy-in from the local animal services agency. So that's the kind of work that's being done.
You're taking this, I think, very smart analytics-driven approach. You've got the data now. What is the biggest hurdle? Is it money? Is it buy-in from local politicians? What would be the biggest hurdle, or what is the biggest hurdle that you're facing right now?
Well, I mean, you can slice those up in a lot of different ways. Money, obviously, resources. You know, the more you have, the more you can do. In terms of actually access to the problem on the ground level, in a lot of cases, it's local policy, whether it's housing policy, breed bans, community cat-friendly programs. So, for example, we have videos of grown men crying. These are animal control officers who suddenly realized that they didn't have to kill cats, that there was another way around this. And they literally in tears at the realization that they didn't have to kill cats anymore, that most of their time was spent rounding up and killing cats. Nobody wants to kill animals. I mean, you just have to sort of dispel the thought that people, get some kick out of killing homeless pets. Nobody does. Being able to give folks the tools to not kill pets, to fulfill their expectations. But the thing was often that there was so much doubt about it, that no, it's not going to happen. We've been doing this. We've tried this. We've tried that. It's just an unfortunate fact of life. And to see them change, and this has happened in places like Baltimore, in San Antonio, in Riverside, California, Albuquerque.
Just from releasing them of the burden that they have been under, Francis? Well, they're having this reaction, is what you're saying?
Yeah, and releasing them from that burden, but also demonstrating to them, contrary to their expectations. Again, the public is more than happy to accept and support life-saving programs, however they're designed. And if that means, hey, you called in with a problem about, cats. So here's what we're going to do. We're going to trap those cats. We're going to spay and neuter them. We're also going to do a search of the community here. We're going to trap a bunch of other cats around here. And now we're going to manage their population. We're going to spay and neuter them. We're going to return them. And if you need some help feeding or whatever, we'll help you with that too. So, and 90% of the time, that's absolutely fine. And that was not expected by most animal control people, because all they ever dealt with was the complaint. So they only ever saw, the negative side of the relationship, and they didn't have the resource or the opportunity to show and present the public with the other side of the picture. We'd go into these communities, we'd run it, we'd put our staff in, hire people to run the program for either we do it as a mentorship basis or in a full-time embed basis. They're in there for 3 years, training people, building the program, and then hand it back over to the city, and the numbers stay the same. They maintain that level of life-saving. It's really amazing.
And so this is a program that will get even more push now, or this is just one of the programs that's active for Best Friends? It sounds like a priority program, because you're saying, the problem here, it's cats.
Well, the problem is cats. I mean, that's the big problem across the country. So really advocating for cat and community cat program friendly regs locally is what is the issue here. So, I mentioned that thing about Los Angeles. Back in 2009, Urban Wildlife sued the city for their TNR program, their
trap neuter,
claiming that it was a violation of CEQA, the California Environmental Quality Act, which is normally something that, if I'm going to build a chemical plant in Laguna Niguel, I have to kind of do an environmental study to demonstrate that I'm not going to, contaminate the wetlands or whatever it might be.
Right.
The idea of taking a cat out of the environment, removing its reproductive organs and putting it back is somehow affecting the environment was, lunacy. But the city argued the case very poorly. They in fact claimed that they didn't have a TNR program, and they didn't, to all intents and purposes, have anything that they were actually doing, but they had almost a paper program on their website. The complainant just printed out the city's website, brought it to court, and the judge says, well, you got one, and you need to have an Environmental Quality Act. You need to do an environmental impact study. So that languished for years. Now that's been taken care of. But through all that time in Los Angeles, we could not implement any of these types of programs. In fact, the city shelters were prohibited from even giving advice about feral cats or community cats, or recommending someone to an organization that did take care of community cats. When we took on the operation at Mission Hills and were utilizing that building on a fee-for-services rental arrangement, we couldn't advise people on community cats. And we couldn't even talk about feral cats. We had developed a code word called pink cats in order to be able to have any.
And this is just to avoid potential litigious behavior by somebody, Francis. Just printing it off the website and ponying it up and going, nope, look, you can't do this.
Yeah, and the city was under an injunction. We would have been in violation of the city's contract if we did anything like that, and so the city couldn't do it. And so the fact that Los Angeles became a no-kill city last year, despite that, is just
miraculous,
because there was no public resource via the Animal Services Department to help people with community cats. And so the only thing they could do was get a trap, bring them in, and they would be killed. The lunacy of that is that the numbers kept creeping up over the time of this, since this was in place. And what that meant was, well, then obviously there are more cats out in the environment, which means more of the urban wildlife that these folks were originally trying to protect have to be being killed because there are more cats.
That's right.
Because you're not allowing the only sensible management tool to be utilized. So it was an entirely self-inflicted wound. But now hopefully we're through all that, and there's going to be new opportunities in this coming year.
Now you say hopefully. Why is it hopefully?
Well, I think it's everything takes a long time to percolate through because it'll be protested. They'll have another, they'll have to kind of deal with another complaint. The environmental impact study was completed. There was a recommendation that was approved to approve community cat type programs, and that will inevitably be challenged. But right now, it's all go.
And I'm just curious, Francis. The challenge comes from someone who has what? I mean, what do they have to gain by challenging?
There's historically been this, and you may have seen it with Audubon or the Smithsonian. That cats are the number one enemy of the songbirds of the world.
Right.
If the cats killed as many birds as they say, there would be no birds. And in fact, the biggest threat to birds is loss of habitat. And the next biggest threat to birds is, skyscraper window.
Pesticide. How about pesticides?
Well, pesticides, all of those things are hugely more impactful on birds than cats are. Cats do hunt. You can't deny that. Cats, kill little critters. And nobody likes that. The historic methodology of dealing with cats in the community is to round them up and kill them. But cats are so prolific that you never get ahead of that curve.
Right.
The only way to actually manage cat populations is to allow cats to maintain their colony size and their population and to fix them.
Neuter them, right?
Spay or neuter them so that they're not reproducing. But they're occupying turf, and so they're not going to be replaced by breeding colonies. So eventually you reduce those colonies and you reduce the numbers of cats at large. If you don't do that, what you're doing is just inviting cats to be more and more productive because they fill the vacuum. And you get more cats at large who are untended, unfixed. If they're going to kill critters, they're going to kill critters. But you're just hurting yourself if you're trying to protect mice and rodents and lizards and birds and small animals in the environment. You're hurting yourself if you think that the solution is to just kill cats. That is not the solution.
Now, it seems logical. It seems, once again, data-driven, and yet someone will be able to pony up an argument and will contest what you're saying.
Indeed. And I think when you get down to it and you really dive into some of this, you just get a lot of people who are, what do they call it? Arealophobes or some term like that. That means people who are really phobic about cats.
Oh, really?
There is a category of psychological condition that really is just phobic about cats. When you get down to it, you realize that, well, if they were really interested in, and because you meet people who are genuinely concerned about this problem, as we are. When we're animal lovers, we don't want to see. And you have folks who have made a study of this and who are conservationists and wildlife folks who understand this and who support it. And then you have folks who are just really just off the deep end, hostile to cats.
I'm watching right now on PBS, Francis, All Creatures Great and Small, James Herriot, the adaptation of James Herriot's book. And one of the vets says it's the animals that are easy. It's the people that are the problem. Right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And also we have studies on this as well. We have studies related to the efficacy of community cat programs and TNR in reducing at-large populations of cats. And so there's no question that this works. It's simply a matter of getting over the hump of the idea of this mindset that, killing things is a solution to anything.
Let me make an abrupt shift in gears. In your wildest imagination, from the time that you guys had the idea, and I've heard the stories, and maybe you can share a little bit of this with us, the genesis of Best Friends, to where
we were standing somewhere and we were looking out at the white cliffs and the canyons, and there was, I think it might have been an all-staff week, and we had, 500 people on Angel's Landing having a celebration. And he said to me, "Did you ever imagine that it would come to this?" And I think, and I don't know that I can swear, but I said, "F no." That remains the same. It's still boggling and humbling perspective on things. I mean, we came here, a group of us in 1984. It was raw land.
And here is, just in case, because in case people don't know, this is literally heaven on earth to me, Angel Canyon in Kanab, Utah, the place that you found, right?
Yeah. It's now probably about 5,000 at the time. It was about 3,000 acres of raw land in southern Utah. It was certainly not in any place that you would locate if you were interested in adopting a lot of pets out to the public. But it was just this magical place. And, we were like most pet rescuers and animal lovers to say, gee, one day I wish I had a place where I could take all the animals, that kind of starry-eyed, idealized idea that you're going to be able to save everything if you only had a big enough piece of land. And so we were like the dog that caught the car,
right, and
acquired this land for an incredibly ridiculous and easy price to get into at the time. And people thought we were crazy at that. So we bought, I think, 3,300 acres of land plus another 30,000 acres of BLM leases for $1.27 million.
In 1984.
1984.
And the estimated value now?
Who knows? It's priceless. But we had trouble doing that. But we got into it for $5,000 down in a $50,000 balloon, and then we ran in the ground and we had to refinance. It was a whole other level of adventure. When we arrived here, we've been doing animal rescue and shelter rescue for a number of years. We had 200 dogs and cats amongst a small group of us. And then one day, one of the dogs wound up in the local pound, which was a tin roof shed in a field, somewhere down by the local airport. And it looked like something out of a World War II prisoner of war camp movie, And once a week, the vet would come over from St. George, about 60 miles away, and the animals that were in there would be just
euthanized.
Killed. One of our dogs wound up in there. One of my colleagues went down, found him, and was just shocked by what he saw and brought back that information. And we said, look, anything we do has to be better than this, even if we just, put him in, orange crates out under a tree here. And as long as we pay him some attention, they'll have more than they got there. So we went to I was delegated to go talk to the mayor and say, hey, mayor, I acquired this land and we'd like to do animal control. And he was watering his flowers in his front yard, and he had one of those kind of, fan spray attachments on the end of his hose, was waving it back and forth. Looked at me and said, okay, we could have been making sausages.
Right.
And really, we
what's your name
idea.
Again? Okay. Okay.
Said, okay. So what next? He said, come in and talk to the chief of police on Monday. So Faith, who was another one of the founders, went in and spoke to him, and she became the de facto animal control officer for 3 counties. She never had an official job, but Kane County, Utah, Garfield County, Utah, and Mojave County, north of the Colorado River in Arizona.
Was it a volunteer position at that point, Francis? Was it a paid?
No, it wasn't paid.
Yeah, okay.
No.
So volunteering, okay.
And, she would get called up every time there was, a domestic case, dog at large, dog running down the street, guy arrested with drugs in his car, dogs and drugs in his car. Every imaginable situation, Faith was called. So she was out day and night working with the police and on calls. And then the rest of us were kind of tied into different things. We started getting, just public requests and complaints. And I remember one situation where somebody said, hey, I got some cats under my trailer here. I don't want to kill them, but I don't have much choice. It's that kind of story. And so, okay, we'll be down. 65 cats later.
Some cats.
And so within a few years, we had 1,000 and 1,300 and 1,500 cats, dogs and cats here at the sanctuary. It had really hit the fan. We were running out of money. It was totally hand to mouth. We'd used up all the resources that we had ever thought we might need to kind of develop what we thought we were going to do, which we really didn't have much. We never really were much on planning anyway, but was all.
And this was how many years later, Francis? This was because you started in 84?
We started in 84, and then by 1989, it really hit the fan. We were in a situation where we had to say, we have to draw the line here. If we don't do something, we have to make this work, or this is going to be a very, very bad news story.
Right.
And it wasn't just that it was going to be a bad news story.
Right.
That was just code for, these animals are at risk, and it's up to us to save their lives.
You guys were officially at DEFCON 1. You were there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so that was when we all said, okay, well, we just have to set aside whatever we love doing and go out and raise money and leave a skeleton team here and just go do it. And so that's how Silva and I wound up in Los Angeles doing fundraising. What was amazing about Los Angeles and the work that we did there was that, we went out there in 1991, started really doing tabling, putting out tables outside of markets, asking people for money, talking about no-kill. The idea of no-kill just blew people away. People would see a sign that we hung off this card table that said, best friends, no-kill animals. People would run across this parking lot. No-kill, wow, what does that mean? And
you had that table and that sign in front of Erewhon, 1993. That's where I met you guys.
Exactly. And we did that for a long time. And the thing is that, everybody eats. And so we met agents, directors, celebrities, people in the industry, people like yourself who were incredibly skilled and capable and committed and willing to help. We were there and we arrived like penniless with $3 a day stipend for food.
Is this true?
Yeah. And we'd, scrabble things together. We'd bring bag lunch and do whatever, but it was $3 to actually buy something.
Were you guys living in the Valley then, France? Where were you?
We were staying at a Holiday Inn Express in Panorama City.
Oh my gosh! And coming into you were in Santa Monica and West LA and right
well, and to begin with,
in Hollywood. That's right.
Somebody set us up in places like Glendale. We thought, boy, Los Angeles sucks. There's nothing here.
Nothing against Glendale, folks.
No,
Glendale's an awesome city.
Nothing against Glendale. No, absolutely nothing against Glendale. But it was kind of like, it was like, imagine the most desperate place in Glendale. She was sticking us in the worst possible. On Sundays, Silva and I would drive around and go, oh my God, look at that.
Why are we over here?
Why are we? So then we discovered Mrs. Gooch's and places like that.
Yep.
Erewhon. The thing that was so amazing about Los Angeles was, certainly at the time, and I think it probably still is, it's a city of hustlers. And I don't mean hustlers from the point of view of con men. I mean, you got to hustle. You have to recreate yourself all the time. All these people in the industry, you're on a project, you're on a job. The movie's completed. You need to find another job.
Yeah, in a way, it was the original gig economy, right? I mean, for the
exactly.
city of freelancers. Yeah.
And so the idea of, being, and you had to put yourself out there and extend yourself and be committed to things. And the fact that we were in that way, I think resonated with people and they kind of took us on in so many ways. So we were there in 91. 2 years later, we were doing celebrity benefit at the Chateau Marmont, and then we did the next one year after that you stood out in a parking lot all day
That's right.
At Saddle Rock Ranch.
That's right.
So, and then, we were...
Parking lot? That was no parking lot. It was a field with 4 foot, 5 foot high grass that we were parking cars in ultimately. That was no parking lot.
Exactly. And then by 2000, you were the celebrity wrangler at the Knitting Factory with Charlize Theron, Laura Dern, Deborah Messing, Hilary Swank, Robert Culp. We had this amazing level of support from celebrities and the industry. This wasn't about, just to be rubbing shoulders with people, but they amplified our voice. They got this message into Variety, into national magazines, onto television internationally. And that then helped build the momentum of both the movement and the organization. So Los Angeles was incredibly important in that way.
Did you ever think after you reached that DEF CON 1 moment where you said, okay, we've got to go out to the 4 corners of the world here, raise money and make this thing work? Did you ever think, even though you were getting that momentum in LA, that maybe you did bite off more than you can chew and it's too big a row to hoe?
We used to sit outside, raise money, call in at the end of the day, let the team here know how much money we'd raised. They had the checkbook for the Bank of America in LA. We'd make a deposit and they'd write a check to pay a bill. It was like that. Everything was kind of, you had to extend your level of commitment and acceptance and kind of accommodation to the fact, I guess I may be here in a wheelchair at some point on a walker. That's what it takes, that's what it takes. So you just had to really extend yourself and make that psychic room to accommodate whatever circumstance arose. And it was kind of a lot of times it was kind of a bit harem-scarum. So many miraculous events. One time, 1991, we were about to run out of pet food here at the sanctuary. It was literally a do-or-die moment. And we were down at the Hughes Market in Malibu, day before Thanksgiving. And Silva meets this guy who says, he's standing there watching, listening to her talk. And then he hands her a card, and she can only read. It says, Calcan. He says, "Oh," she says, "maybe you can help us with some food." And he said, "Well, that's what I was thinking." She said, "Oh, but we get it by the semi, and we're in Utah." He says, "That's okay. We're international." Then when she got into the light, it says, I'm not going to say the guy's name, but Calcan, president. A week later, we had 8 semis of food at the sanctuary.
True story again.
True story. And it was, again, one of these serendipitous things. They'd come out with this pet food called Waltham, and they described it as a scientifically developed diet. Anyway, they used science, and they infringed on science diets.
Right. Hillside diet, right?
And so they had to dump all of it. They had warehouses of this stuff that they had to dump. And we had it in Salt Lake. It was like it's kept us going for the next year.
So your manna from heaven was Calcan mislabeled dog food.
It's actually Waltham. It wasn't necessarily mislabeled. I got caught in the squeeze.
Infringement.
They became great supporters and sponsored a number of our events. They paid for the work that we were doing out there, trying to get people to the vet during the riots, after the riots, when things were kind of shut down. That was another cycle. And then the earthquake, when we created we're out there trying to raise money for the animals, and people are saying, "Hey, there are riots going on." And then the other was, well, there's all this debris around. It was like this crazy.
That was 94, Northridge quake.
94, yeah.
Yep.
And we got rolled out of bed and where we were staying, and then had to go stand out in a parking lot while they checked for the gas leaks. We set up a lost and found pet hotline to support people, to help people relocate their animals that had been displaced by the earthquake. Set up a phone tree and helpline and volunteers to help people navigate the system of where to get their pets, how to find their pets, what the most likely location might be. If it's a cat, it's going to be, look in your backyard, they're going to hide. If it's a dog, you're going to have to check the shelters for countywide and, into neighboring counties.
And for a little bit of context on this, Francis, where earlier you were talking about how with the pandemic, the technology in a way really met the challenge, and we were able to do things that we could never really do even just 5 years ago. The technology was affordable, scalable. You're talking 93, 94, setting up a phone tree, getting this communication. That was like, I'm cranking up my car with a hand crank time when you think back. I mean, I'm thinking about the early, I didn't even know it was called a super adoption event, that first one that we worked, where we didn't even have radios. We go, "Hey, go tell Francis." We were like runners in World War I, running across this giant field, these parks, to get from one place to another and then try and find each other and communicate. This is how you and Silva were making these things happen. And this was in the earthquake. You set up a phone tree. You just said it like you just did it. But it couldn't have been easy.
Well, it wasn't, but it was, okay, how do we help? How do we stay both relevant and also be contributive? And those super adoptions that we did, the first few that we did, were really interesting and fun. And I remember the time, do you remember Vincent, the guy he was a homeless person? And Silva came up, there were a group of homeless men there. This African-American guy, Silva, said, "Look, just so you know, we're going to be loading in a lot of stuff. You don't need to move, but we just wanted to explain to you what we're going to be doing here." And this is when we were getting all of our equipment and tents and tables and everything. He said, "Well, can I help?" And Silva said, "Sure." And, Silva was kind of frantic with clipboards and this and that, trying to organize where things went. We were much less organized than we ultimately got. On that first day, after meeting this guy, he was obviously demonstrated his reliability. In about 15 minutes, she handed him the clipboard and said, "You organize it." And so there was this homeless person. He was Silva's right-hand person. And he was kind of running all of these different people and things. It was really quite remarkable. Then we helped him get a job. And anyway, you
guys really redefined grassroots.
Totally. And he was a wonderful man. He just hit hard times, and had some personal problems. He'd been an Army intelligence officer. He spoke German. He was he lost his shirt doing day trading. He was, it was a lot of different things, and he had a drug problem, but he was really a really, really wonderful man. We were able to help him and, made it a few steps up, sort of plateaued, but he got out of where he was at.
I think if nothing else, Francis, with these great stories and you guys rising to meet the challenge of a global pandemic, we come out with 2 T-shirt ideas is what I'm feeling. And that's the nose in, nose out. And then Best Friends 1984, 2021, no effing way. I think, I think maybe those ideas might have legs. I could go down the rabbit hole with you forever because these stories mean something to me. Hopefully they mean something to any of the folks that join us and listen in. I want to thank you for sharing them. And I want to thank you for starting this on a, I don't know if it was a whim, but group of friends that had maybe not the clearest vision and then pressed through incredible challenges and continue to do so, whether we talk about whether it's earthquakes or hurricanes or riots or now the global pandemic, and having a team of now 800 diverse staff. Sounds like it's about to get more diverse. I just want to say job well done, but it's still going. It's still going.
And the folks we handed it off to are smarter, more capable, in so many ways, more creative than we were. I mean, we had a big, crazy idea. We had to kind of figure it out from the seat of our pants. It was scrappy and often failed. But right now we've got such an amazing team. I can't say enough about them.
I can hear it in your voice. And let me just ask you a quick thing, and then I can let you go. Julie is the CEO now. How many of the original founding group are still involved?
A lot of us live at the sanctuary, but a number have passed away. About 13 of us are still active in the organization.
Out of how many in that original group, in the founding group?
I think really probably 20 odd.
That's pretty impressive.
Still pretty odd.
Still pretty odd. And was Julie part of the original group?
No, Julie was employee number 17. Julie was on her way to law school at the University of Virginia. Came from a very connected Utah family, was headed for a career in law, probably corporate or Washington law. She was on her way back from a farewell to freedom trip to Mexico with some friends. Was kind of grimy, dirty. Her friend insisted on swinging by the sanctuary because she was sponsoring a dog. Julie saw it, talked to a few people, caught the vision, and was hooked, called her father and said, I'm not going to law school.
And will her father speak the words best friends to this day?
Well, sadly, her father passed away, but it was something he really had a hard time with. She's a whole other story and a really interesting person and an incredible leader.
Man, I always love hanging out with Francis. Just a great conversationalist, wonderful guy, wonderful heart, and a wonderful organization, as you probably now know. If you ever get the chance to visit the sanctuary, you will be blown away, guaranteed. The first time I went there with my wife, more recently took our twins. It's truly, truly magical. And it is in the Gateway area, if you haven't been to Kanab, small town, but gateway to Zion, Bryce, Grand Canyon, not too far away. Just really special, special country. And the new Best Friends Roadhouse Hotel, newly opened, 54 rooms, I want to say, and all this forethought for people and their pets. So just a fantastic place, a fantastic experience, great way to visit the sanctuary and experience what they've been able to do over all these years and through all these challenges. I can't say enough good things about them, but you can find out more for yourself by going to bestfriends.org. And of course, they appreciate any kind of support or donation, but really, I can't stress enough, if you get a chance to make that trip, you will not be disappointed. Fun trivia fact, Angel Canyon is the scene, and Kanab in general, of many of the Westerns that Hollywood has made famous. And if you were a fan or know of the original Lone Ranger TV series, where the Lone Ranger's up on the cliff with Silver, does that opening sequence, it was shot there in the canyon. And yeah, it is that beautiful. Okay, I could go on and on, but I've already done too much talking. So thanks again for hanging out. I hope you enjoyed hanging with Francis and myself. We enjoyed having the conversation, and I look forward to more with Francis. Until then, stay safe. And remember, you will find no bed of roses wherever you find fine podcasts. See you soon. Bye.